Hi everyone, welcome to the Desteni I Process live Google Hangout. I'm Christina and I'm your host today for this installment of the final episode in the series that has been walked in relation to family, transforming family dynamics. Tonight we're talking specifically about our relationships with our fathers, and with me I have two ladies who are here to talk about their relationships with their fathers and points that they have faced and the processes they have walked, specifically with the Desteni process tools that has supported them to kind of reflect on who they have been with their father. And yeah, so let me just introduce, I have Michelle with me. She is in Vienna. Hi Michelle, welcome.
Hello.
And then also we have Christine, who is in the US. She is in California. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Okay, cool. Cool to have you guys. So just a reminder also, we encourage you guys and we want to remind you to be a part of the discussion. So on the Google Plus page for Desteni I Process, you can use the Q&A app and ask questions or comments or anything you'd like to share. Please use that. If you're watching from YouTube, there should be a link on the video that says be a part of the discussion. So click that and engage in the discussion with us. So yeah, so as I was saying, this is the last installment of the series that has been walked in relation to family, changing family dynamics. There has been discussions on parenting, sibling rivalry, the idea of what it means to be a perfect wife. And so yes, we're going to close this series with facing the relationships we have with our father. And so yeah, let's just start. Michelle's going to give us a brief history on her experience with her father growing up and what were some of the points that she faced. So Michelle, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your time with your father growing up?
Yes. Basically, growing up as a child with my dad, it was cool. You know, we were very playful together, but when I became a teenager, like most teenagers, conflicts with parents are pretty common. So in my case, as a teenager, I was very insecure and sensitive about my appearance and my weight. I was heavier than most girls, and it was due to my emotional eating patterns. So there was this one time where I was crying and I was saying, "Oh, I'm so fat," and my dad was around and I wanted him to soothe me and make me feel better. But he simply, sat down with me and he just told me, directly, there's always diet and exercise. But at that time, I was quite emotional, and that's not what I wanted to hear. So from that, I basically kind of just took his advice, and I just like held on to that point as a grudge. Like, that's it. Like I felt it was more like a personal attack because that's what I was not expecting. So. So throughout my teenage years, I just kind of became mean towards my dad. I would just give him an attitude whenever he would talk to me. I'd maybe say a few words or a few sentences. I just really didn't want to do anything with him until my sister, she started to point out my behavior. She's like, why are you so mean to him and stuff like that. And that's actually when I started to become aware, okay, maybe I am being a little too harsh towards him. But when I was growing up, there was a time where my father was really stressed, and in a moment of reaction, he made a comment about my weight, which I took very personally, and I held on to it for a few years. I was really quite hurt with that point, but then when I started to walk the Desteni I process, there were realizations that came through, which I can share later in the hangout.
Cool. Yeah, would you say, Michelle, that as a parent, I mean, for me, I can see that I blamed a lot of how I was on my parents, because from my perspective, they created me and I'm a result of them. And so I saw a lot of points of, well, you're responsible for who I am in terms of what I didn't like about myself. Is that something that you could see in relation to the weight in terms of any points of blame, feeling like somehow your parents are responsible or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was the one responsible for my eating patterns. I had difficulty coping with school, dealing with social aspects within school, the popular kids. I mean, feeling like I fit in. So because I didn't know how to cope with all that, I did turn to food for eating. And then when I was, in that emotional time saying, "Oh, I'm so fat," yeah, I was just basically projecting blame, like just, "Oh man, I can't do anything about it." And my dad simply, I mean, he was very direct, and it's the best he gave, like the best advice he could give to me in that moment, and it's not exactly what I wanted. So yeah, I definitely was responsible for my feelings towards myself, my insecurities. I was I was doing this to myself, but I didn't have the tools or the education to work on that.
Yeah, cool. Christine, do you want to give us a little bit? I mean, you're a part of our senior community in the Destiny group, and so we know that you have quite the story in relation to the life you've lived with your father. So, do you want to give a little, just a brief kind of synopsis um, of the flow or the journey that you've walked with your father, just in terms of where you guys have been?
Okay, yes, I will. Well, first of all, just my dad is Italian American, authoritarian. Things have to be his way, and that's the way I was raised. And I was a child in the 50s, and I was the oldest girl, and I had two younger brothers, and I was raised with no choices. So I developed a resentment towards him. And I saw my dad as opinionated and bigoted and arrogant. Those are the biggest words I would say I used. When I got into my 20s, my late 20s, I embraced spirituality. I actually had what I would consider a spiritual awakening. And from that moment on, and for the next 30 years, I embraced unconditional love, which I thought I was doing, which basically was self-interest, as I see now, as I came to the awareness through Destiny. But through all those 30 years, what I did, I wouldn't say so much that I forgave my dad as I believed that I gave him unconditional love. And I, through spirituality, what I did is I loved him in spite of himself. So that very point right there was not really embracing all aspects of him or who he was, which I didn't even become aware of until I became aware of Destiny. So through the 30 years of being spiritual, I loved my dad. I suppressed a lot that I didn't realize at the time. The way my dad raised me, I had my children when I was 30, 31. My children are now 33, 34 years old. And I raised them the complete opposite of the way my dad raised me, the way my mom raised me. I did not want them to feel resentful. I did not want them to not be heard. I did not want them to not have choices. So that's what I gave to them because I felt I didn't receive that from my father. But all in all, as far as conflict in the past 30 years, we kind of stayed away from that. My dad many times thought I was part of a cult because I embraced a lot of different New Age thoughts. So he thought I was a lot of weird out there. And of course, I held my own beliefs towards him. So we agreed to disagree. And we stayed away from different topics. The one time we did have a conflict was actually when I was walking Desteni process. I actually ended up hanging up on him. And I had to look at that. I had to look at and I wrote about it. I wrote about that. Because what happens is once I embraced destiny and started to walk out of all that spirituality, the other aspects of me were there. The aspects that were my dad were still there. So that's where the conflict came in. So
Yeah, so is that like then that point that you're talking about in terms of finding spirituality and learning to unconditionally love him? It was more based in you had these like reactions towards him in terms of how he raised you, and the words you listed in terms of being authoritative and feeling like you had no choice. And so with spirituality and letting go of that stuff, it was more an act of still having those resentments for how he was, but basically saying, well, he's not going to change, and I'm not going to change the way I feel about how he raised me, but I'm going to just, kind of let it be what it is, like an acceptance or a submission, basically, of, I'm just going to accept these feelings that I have towards him, but I'm not going to give him any more attention. I'm not going to participate anymore. But it's still like an acceptance. There's not really like change within yourself in relation to who he was or how you felt about him. It was just more of like accepting that that's how it exists. That's something.
you mean like with that one conflict that we had?
Or just basically like, how you were saying that how you didn't like how he had raised you, and you felt like, you didn't have any choice or whatever, and so you guys had like disagreements about maybe certain beliefs, or you had disagreements about how to live, and and in there's conflict in that, but accepting that conflict to exist, basically, like with the unconditional love, was it's just the way it is. It's like just accepting that that's how things are, and not considering that maybe you could change yourself in relation to him, but rather you just kind of gave into the unconditional love, and I'll just unconditionally love him for who he is, and I don't like who he is, but I can,
Well, I guess one of the biggest things was anger. And my brothers had this anger too towards him. And so this taking on this unconditional love, what I believed at the time was I believed that love was a power, okay, but a feeling, that fuzzy feeling. So what I did is I just surrounded that feeling of anger, and I transformed it, or so I thought I did, into this feeling of love and acceptance. Which when I finally started walking destiny, I realized that all I had done is suppress it, and all I had really done was polarize that design. That's all I did. Went from one extreme to the next.
Yeah, and not really understanding why you had anger, like what specifically about your dad.
I knew why I knew why I had anger, but I thought that I had transformed that. I thought I had let it go through love, that feeling of love.
Yeah, just going to the opposite feeling.
Exactly. Instead of, as we've learned through destiny, that love is an action that you walk where you stand equal and one with another. You stand in the shoes of another and ask how you can help, contribute to another as yourself. So it wasn't coming from that starting.
Yeah. Cool. Michelle, do you want to share a little bit about your experience? You're talking about how you took what your dad said personally, and you're really sensitive to what he had to say. Since starting the Destiny process and becoming self-reflective, you could say, and doing your own self-investigations, what were some of the realizations that you had in relation to why you reacted to your father the way that you did?
Yeah, so one of the realizations I found was I had an expectation, and I wanted my dad to somehow create this ideal outcome. I wanted him to say what I had in mind, but he instead said what he wanted to express in the moment. So, in that moment of expectation, I went into the polarity of disappointment. So, that's one point I realized, walking the Destiny I process, and also having buddy chats with with my buddy in the course. So that was a realization that came through where, you know, I was in that expectation, but I did not consider my dad, and I did not take his words simply as they are. I made it an emotional thing. And then with the other memory where my dad was in a reaction and he said those things about my weight, which I took very personally, I did not see that why he did that or what was behind the point, until someone from the course showed me that it really wasn't about me. It was not something that I didn't have to take personally, because that was a point that my dad was existing in himself that he projected onto me. So his comment about my weight wasn't necessarily towards me directly. It was really a point within him that he was expressing and projecting out towards me, and I took it personally. So upon realizing that comment really wasn't for me, or personally something for me, I felt relief because I had for so long held on to that point, that anger, you know, and to realize when people have reactions, it really isn't about you. It's about the person and the point that they're, you know, existing in and going through.
Yeah.
So that's what I found really, like, whoa, opened my eyes.
That's a cool point too, because I think that we tend to look at our parents or fathers in a very limited perspective, like they're the father, and it's like we forget that they're human beings and they had a life before we existed, and they had experiences that kind of created and developed who they were as parents, you know. And so I think that it's really easy to let go of that. It's really easy to see them in such a limited capacity, instead of realizing like they have their own experiences that they're facing, they have their own reactions. And I think as a parent, unless you are a parent, like, you know, maybe Christine can share on this, unless you're a parent, you don't really know what it's like to be in that position and to have perhaps seeing your children go through difficult times or difficult experiences themselves. It's like, as children, we don't really know what it's like to be a father. I mean, as females, we don't know what it's like to be a father, but even as children, we don't know what it's like to be a parent. But maybe Christine can maybe enlighten us a little bit in terms of how did it change for you becoming a parent yourself, in terms of seeing how you initially experienced your dad growing up, and then once you became a parent, I mean, did that change at all some of the relationship you had with your dad?
Well, I started, as I said, walking that point of unconditional love before I had my children. I moved out to California in 1978. I have not lived near my father in all those years, okay? So I was able to divest myself of different parts of myself that I didn't like. So when my children came along, I was in the belief of wanting to be virtuous, to give that to my children, because if I was off, my kids were way off. And as far as like as I said, with my raising my children, I didn't want to raise them the way I was raised. I didn't want them to feel the frustration, the resentment, and the anger that I felt because I wasn't allowed to have a voice. I wasn't allowed to talk. I wasn't allowed to communicate. I was always dismissed with what I wanted. It was never about me. It was, and so that what I saw with my brothers and myself, what that manifested in was a lot of anger. Mm-hmm. And a lot of resentment, because you're not able to express yourself. And one of the things, when you're raised by somebody like my father, where everything has to be their way, so that you have to conform to that, you're so busy conforming that you're not expressing who you are, because you don't know who you are, because you're not allowed to express those natural expressions that come through. They get squashed. And I didn't want to do that with my kids.
Well, so would you say though that, I mean, you were mentioning earlier in the before the hangout started how you kind of that decision was based purely on the fact that you didn't like the way that you were raised, and so you were going to do the opposite. Do you see though that maybe you could have done it differently in terms of how you decided to parent your children? Um,
Well, now that I've walked Destiny since 2009 process, I also see now the error in the way that I raised my children. Okay, would I go back to the way my dad raised me? No, but did I go to the other extreme? I think I did. So, these past 5 years, what I've done is walked a point of stability with both of my children, reestablishing a practical, common sense, stable starting point in life. So it's kind of like been having to parent them all over again, so to speak.
yeah.
And
Do you find though that in terms of you just being in the role of a mother and as a parent, that I mean, did you have any sense of okay, I can kind of understand what my dad or what my mother was going through? Like for me, my dad, my parents divorced when I was 7, and my dad he left and he was, he didn't live in the same state, and so he was more absent than present in my life. And I remember I had to like growing up, I dealt outwardly a lot with the emotions and feelings I had about that. I would cry, I went to counseling, I did a lot of writing. Like it affected me, and I was open about that, how I felt about him not being around. And I remember when I got to my 20s, it was like this point of I was at his age when he had left. And I was like, I can't imagine being this age and having 2 small children and being married, and so that allowed me to kind of see an understanding of like, okay, I can understand where he was, and I can understand that I can maybe understand what he was going through, and that allowed me to kind of let go of some of the blame that I had, because I was able to maybe see that, you know, I could see that I could just relate in a way, just being in the same age, like I can let some of this go. So I mean, for you as a parent, did that come through in terms of, okay, I'm a parent, I have these children, I can see the tendency to want to impose, I mean, because even an unconditional love is an imposing of a belief onto the children, just like the conforming authority kind of father. So did you see any of that in terms of once you were a parent? Okay, I understand what my dad was maybe going through.
well, I guess in all honesty, I faced a lot of that before I had my children.
Mm.
In my early 20s, I went a whole year without talking to them. I was angry at them. And then when I started delving into deeper meanings of life, what I did before I had my children is I went back into both of my parents, their childhood, my grandparents, because I wanted to see generationally where had these preconceived ideas and thoughts just carried through from one to the next to the next. One of the greatest things, I don't know your generation, but mine was, my mother always said, because they said, the answer was because they said so. And as I got older, it was like, well, who the hell, what's they? Who's they? I want to know who they is. And I couldn't conform to that.
Yeah.
So I completely rebelled. I completely rebelled against my parents. And did I understand them when I had my children? You know what? I don't think I had reached that point yet, because I thought I was superior, okay? I was coming from a place of superiority. I thought I was a superior parent. because I listened to my children, because I gave them choices, because I raised them in the mountains around nature, and I was very careful about what they ate, and I investigated and studied, and I thought I was the mother. So that's where I was all those years.
That's an interesting point that you bring up about, because they said, or because it is, it's like that they point, it's like the authority, that's like the ultimate parent design is, the boss and in charge. And I think that for us too, it's easy to have expectations on our parents and ideas and definitions and judgments about them because they're in that role. It's like, yeah, and then you react and you want to rebel because you're feeling like an authority is being imposed on you and you just want to be yourself, and it can create a lot of conflict. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say one thing on what I did embrace when I was raising my children, and I did a lot of spiritual counseling for a lot of years. And I was of the belief that you chose your parents. And by just even believing that at that time, that means that you had to take responsibility for what you chose in life. And so this is what I would share with people. This is what, and like if my kids would say something to me, I would go, well, you chose me. So there you go. So that in itself was a step, I think, towards everybody owning their own life and taking responsibility for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that.
Cool, yeah. Let's see, Michelle. So let's talk a little bit about how, since walking the Destiny I process, and your realization that you had in relation to realizing your dad, what he had said to you in relation to your weight. It wasn't anything personal against you. It was kind of his own points. How has that realization and just in general your life and your process and how you're walking your process, how has the relationship between you guys changed? Do you still find that you have that grudge against him or those resentments, or have you been able to kind of let those go, or how is your relationship now?
Yeah, I've definitely, I can say that I have let those go, those points go, but it is still a process unfolding. There's probably many more points within the father-daughter relationship that I have with him to still work on, but generally, the relationship has been so much more stable since walking process, because of the buddy chats that I've had, and also within the writings where, in the writings, I would start to consider factors, my dad's background, the family in general, and I started to become more aware of like placing myself in his shoes to really see like where he's coming from. And this is what the Desteni I process has helped me with, especially with walking the course, having the buddy to assist me, and also with the writing. And so I started to become more aware of how I experience myself around my dad. So if I do react to something he says or does, I do know that there is a point existent within me that he's showing of myself. And just like if I were to make a judgment, or if my dad were to make a judgment onto another and I react to that, that means that I also judge within me, and he's just showing that about myself. So my relationship generally turned from being me being angry and like spiteful towards him to actually like wanting to talk to him just to see how his day goes. And I've actually been enjoying my conversations when I do talk to him, and I like to see if maybe I can add some insight or just something I want to like support him. It's more like since all those years since I've been kind of like mean to him, it's like I kind of want to make up for that. I want to be able to help him and support him in his life and in his day generally. But I do see that there is a sort of resistance because I don't know if parents necessarily want to get advice from their kids or input or something. So that's something that I'm still walking with. So I try to share some insight every now and then, but yeah, generally it has stabilized. So
yeah, that's very cool. I can relate to that too. It's like since walking with Desteni, it's like you really just open yourself up to the people in your life, and it's almost like you bring the guard down, and it's like I can just be with you in this moment, and I can communicate with you, and it's like removing the roles of child and parent or father and daughter, and just being like, I'm a human being and you're a human being, and let's have a chat. How was your day? What's going on? And then just communicating. It's like without those characters of, the father and the daughter, or, the mother and the child, it's like without those roles, we can just communicate as human beings and realize that, we go through a lot of the same experiences. Our parents might be a generation, beyond us, but they went through the same process in terms of aging and schooling and relationships, and it's like, well, I mean, who knows what we're missing out when we're stuck in resentments and blame and anger towards our parents. And Christine, I think that you can share about that in terms of how you have been able to kind of see a different side of your dad since walking with Desteni, and you want to share a little bit about that in terms of how your perception has changed of him and how you see him now versus how you grew up seeing him?
I really can. And in fact, I just recently did some blogging about this. My dad is 93 years old, and he is in excellent health. He still drives. He doesn't use any walker, cane, or hearing aids, or he only takes one blood pressure pill, and he's incredibly healthy and totally mentally clear. And it's really taken me through walking through Destiny to finally stop, really look at my dad and go, well, wait a minute, here's this man in his 90s who's in better physical health than some people half his age. So what has he done differently? What has he done to physically assist and support himself? So then I started looking back at his life, and I have never ever seen my dad overindulge in anything. Never overindulged eating or drinking, or he quit smoking cigarettes in 1969, and my dad was always, once he decided he was going to do something, he just did it. And so I came to realize that my dad was not living the consequences of his life, but he was living the benefits of a life of moderation. So what I did was I interviewed him. And I asked him questions that I never asked him before. And he was it really meant a lot to him that I asked him these questions, and I really wanted to know what he was like as a child and as a teenager. And he told me. And it was my father and my grandmother. My grandfather had gone back to Sicily when my father was born, so it was just the two of them. And my father always chose the path of moderation. He always self-disciplined himself. He always did what he was supposed to do. When he was younger, he there was a group of them that played together, and they played sports outside. He grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, and he just carried this through. And so what I came to see is that, of course, he had a hard time with us kids. He was always self-disciplined. He always did what he said he was going to do. So, of course, when he sees somebody else that's not doing what they're saying they're going to do, or disciplining himself, of course it's going to be hard for him to understand that, because he never did that. And then the other point that I would like to share is that what I learned after a few years of walking Destiny was my dad had a strong sense of duty. He was in World War II, he was in the Navy. He was a very good provider for my mother, my brothers, and myself. He took care of his mother. My grandfather came back when my dad was 30 years old. My dad went and met him at the airport after my grandfather had deserted him as a baby, and took him into his home. So my dad always believed in doing the right thing, and he always did. And so I found that I could apply this to my life. I could, I could apply that into making sure I'm living the words that I am applying in my life, that I can be moderate in my choices. So coming from a place of judging him or unconditionally loving him in spite of himself through destiny, I have come to appreciate him.
Yeah, that's very cool because, yeah, it's like initially you had such reactions to who he was, but as you've gotten older and started to apply yourself in your own life in terms of these points of discipline and trustworthiness and honesty, it's like then you can recognize that in him and even learn from the example that he's living, which is really cool because I think that it's so easy for us, and this is kind of what we take on in the Desteni I process is we have this whole reality in our mind in terms of how we think people are based on their words or how we communicate with them, but it's our perception of them are only based within our own internal filters, and we miss perhaps how someone is actually physically living, which, Christine, you're sharing that your dad is physically taking care of himself and he's physically supported himself, and his physical actions are showing a consequence which are of benefit, and that's really cool. That's a really cool example. We have a, yeah, did you, yeah. We have a question from Sylvia here, and Sylvia is saying, let's see, I have to select this, okay. We tend to choose our life partners according to the personalities of our parents. Which parent does resemble the partners you've chosen so far in life? And did the struggle you had with your dad interfere with that choice? So that's not specifically directed to anyone. So if you guys, any of you guys have anything to say about that, that's a good question for you.
I do know that in my psychology course, yeah, I learned about how people tend to pick their spouses that are like for women, they pick spouses that are like their fathers. Men, they pick spouses like, yeah, their mothers. So when I married my partner, I don't know, I didn't really see my father in him. I did see my mother, interestingly enough, but
Yeah.
not my father so much. So.
Well, you know, there was a book a number of years ago about instead of women choosing their fathers, they choose their mothers.
Interesting.
Yeah. As far as myself, I'm still walking that relationship point because right now I'm not in a relationship, and I haven't been in one for a long time. And that's another hangout.
Yeah.
That's still something I'm still walking with.
Yeah.
With you, say, Christina, with your relationship?
Yeah, I was just looking. I'm trying to see. I mean, it was interesting because I kind of grew up, without the presence of the father, so it was kind of like that. I was living that point of, oh, daddy issues. My dad's not around, and so it's like almost expected that I would go and seek for male fulfillment in relationships. And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess I can see that actually. Like when I would get into a relationship, that person would be basically my whole life. And, I'm not sure, I haven't really investigated whether that is coming from the point of just wanting the male presence. I can see when I have been in relationships, that point of abandonment does come up a lot. And it's come up in my in my current relationship where it's like, even though, I know where my partner stands and he knows where I stand, there is that, like, deep-rooted fear of being left because he'll just leave. And I've often related that to how my relationship with my dad played out. But I also feel like that's too easy. Like there could be something else. But yeah, I mean, I can relate to things that happened with my father come up as fears in my in my relationships with my partners. Yeah. Thank you, Sylvia, for that. Let's see. We have another comment from Valentine. and he is saying, I also had a lot of resentments towards my father, and with the help of Destiny tools, the relationship transformed into a relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that kind of seems to be the point here in terms of our hangout, is that whether it is a father relationship or a mother or friendships or lovers or children, the point is that we're all human beings, and when we step outside of the, the family roles in terms of the daughter and the father, and we allow ourselves to just like interact as equals, as human beings, as living a life experience together, then the similarities really open up, and the ability to relate and the ability to share and to learn and grow from each other becomes quite clear in terms of, you might have lived one experience, or my dad might have lived an experience that I am just now facing, and he might have insights that can support me as I walk through it. So it's just a matter of seeing that, the relationships that we have in our life, specifically family too, I think is really great because they're so close to us. It's so personal that there are so many gifts in being able to reflect on who am I, and what does my family have to share with me, and what do I have to share with my family, and yeah, it's very cool. Do you guys have any comments about Valentine's?
I agree. I agree. Mutual respect and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. I agree.
Cool. Well, we are coming up to the 40 minutes, or we have surpassed the 40 minutes of our Google Hangout, so I'm just going to look to see if there was anything we wanted to discuss that we haven't.
Well, you had on the thing that you sent us that. You had, what suggestions would you give to anyone facing a complicated or conflictual relationship with your father? You asked us that question.
Yeah, that's, I think, a great send-off for the Hangout.
And so I guess I just would like to say that, and I've learned this through Destiny, is first of all, you can't change somebody else. You can only change yourself and how you react to them. Mm-hmm. And as far as like being able to really come to appreciate and respect and understand, we'll just say your father because that's what this hangout is about. I just strongly recommend getting yourself a notebook or get your computer and write it out. Write it out there in front of you, because you'd be amazed at how much is going to come out that as you reflect on your life. And then another thing I would suggest as you go along, because it's a process, take your time. Don't be impatient. Be patient with yourself and with your family member, with your dad. And then maybe eventually you can do what I did, is you can interview them. And you can come up with questions about their past or different things that they've gone through. And when he saw that he was being appreciated, it was a really nice moment between us. And I'm really glad that I did that. And I'm really glad that I got to gain deeper insight into him.
Cool.
Cool, yeah, and just for me, I suggest, if there's a problem within the relationship, to, within writing, identify what the problem is, and to, within that, see where your responsibility lays within it. So if you tend to get in fights with your dad, and and with writing, you could find out, for example, that you fuel the fights because you yell in reaction. So now you know that that's how you fuel the fights, and so within walking the tools, you can find ways where you can speak to your dad in stability. Instead of yelling, you can maybe take a breath and calm yourself down, maybe walk out the room and then come back and then communicate. So little things like that one can work on.
Yeah, very cool. I
agree.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I don't think I could say it any better, and I think that we'll close with that. So thank you guys so much for
Thank you, guys.
for joining us. Yeah, I will say that this is the last Google Hangout in relation to the family dynamics. Next week, we will be off from Google Hangouts, so stay tuned for in 2 weeks. We'll be back with a new series, which I believe is on education and studying and the whole process with school. So stay tuned for that. And also tomorrow on the Destiny I Process Google Plus page, we will be having a Destonian movie night with Victor. And he and a couple guys are going to be talking about the movie Limitless, I think. I think that's the movie that they're discussing.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
check it out tomorrow. And thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.